Good morning, everybody. This is Zach at it again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I'm honored to have from the Wohlfahrt Haus Dinner Theater's wonderful production of Fiddler on the Roof, Mikey Miller. He plays Motel in the show, and I'm honored to have him with me. Thank you so much for being on the show this morning, Mikey.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Zach.
And I was really, really happy to get in touch with you through my good friend George Bailey, who is directing you in this wonderful production.
Yes.
I had never seen Fiddler on the Roof. I knew it was very famous, one of the most famous musicals of all time. I knew it jump-started careers for some of my favorite people like Bette Midler and B. Arthur, and comic legend Zero Mostel was Tavian in the original one. So I knew it was a great show. I didn't know, I had never seen it, didn't know anything about it, didn't want to know anything about it till I saw the show because I wanted it to be very fresh, and it was. And,
I love that.
And since George Bailey has taken the helm at Wohlfahrt Haus Dinner Theater, the shows, the actors, everything has reached a new level of height and class and professionalism. And I'm very happy to be back reviewing shows at the Wohlfahrt Haus. Fiddler on the Roof was a terrific ensemble show. And I was especially happy that George said he could put me in touch with you because he tells me that you are actually Jewish.
Yes.
And he was coming to you for particulars on the play, like how do they wear the prayer hats on their heads.
Yes. Yeah, the yarmulkes, kind of the little hats that we wear, the talit, which are the prayer shawls. So if you see little fringes coming out from underneath our shirts, the guys' shirts, those are called tzitzit, and those exist at the bottom of the prayer shawls. And in an Orthodox Jewish community in 1905 Russia, those would peek through. So that's what you're seeing there.
And what other things did George come to you to make sure that he got right in this instance?
Yeah, so I put together recordings for our entire cast of all of the characters' names. So, like my character, for example, it's spelled Motel, like motel, but it is pronounced model. My character's ultimate wife, love interest, her name is Seidel. There's a TZ at the beginning of her name, and a lot of people who just don't have the knowledge might think that it's pronounced Zeidel just with a Z, because the TZ or the TS sound is a sound that exists in Hebrew. So just teaching kind of the cast members and our production staff how to say a lot of the words. I worked with Dwayne Reeder, who's wonderful, our rabbi, on being able to say the blessing, kind of the generic first 6 words of any Hebrew blessing is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam. So we worked on perfecting that. Some other things that George came to me and asked me about were kind of the way like the tables should be dressed during the Sabbath prayer scene. So making sure that the candlesticks, that the bread, the challah was covered in the correct way, whatever would exist on these tables. So just anything that's cultural or religious that he needed help with, he came to me.
So what was it like? Where did you grow up, first of all? And what was it like for you growing up Jewish, for those who would not know?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I am from a little town in northern New Jersey called Florham Park. It's about a 45-minute drive from New York City, basically directly west of New York City. And growing up Jewish was really, really important to me. I'm not a super religious person, but my Judaism is kind of, it is the foundation of my culture. Both sides of my family are Jewish. I spent, I want to say 6 or 7 years attending Hebrew school. So I think I'm pretty well versed in the culture and the religion. And I know a few select words in Hebrew. I used to know more Hebrew than I do now. I can read completely in Hebrew, though. The language is read from right to left. And for someone who is used to kind of our Latin letters, Hebrew letters and vowels are going to look quite different and just incredibly different from the Latin letters that we're interested in. So I know how to read all of that, but I was bar mitzvahed. I spent 5 years also teaching Hebrew school. So I know a lot about the tradition, the culture, the religion, the holidays. It was just like a very, very important part of my value system. And I think Judaism, even if it's not familiar to many people, a lot of the values are very, very similar to a lot of the values you find in any cultural group. And a couple of the things that I've taken with me as a Jewish person that I think are most important are the importance of family, food, and education. And I think most people, no matter their culture, their religion, their background, would agree that those are 3 of the most important values of life. So yeah, that's really how my Judaism has had an impact on me.
So as a musical theater actor, it must mean a great deal to you to be a part of a production like Fiddler on the Roof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Fiddler on the Roof, and specifically playing the role of Model, has been a dream role of mine, and getting to be in this production has been really, really special. And I was unprepared for the emotions that I felt last week when we opened, but so far it's been, and I know it's going to continue to be, it's been really stunning and really, really magical and really important. And it's kind of funny, though, because I was actually in the Wohlfahrt House's production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat back in the spring, and I played Benjamin. So it's quite funny to have been here a couple times this year playing Jewish characters. It's really, really special to me.
So, of all the characters you could play, why is Motel specifically a dream role for you?
Yeah, so Motel is a dream role for me because my type generally tends to be kind of I'm 5'6", I'm quite slight in frame, so I often play these quirky, nerdy, down-to-earth characters. So Motel has just kind of been on that slate, and being just in the show that's really important to me, that's really where the marriage of those desires kind of meld.
Well, that leads into a question I was going to ask. I was going to ask the similarities between you and Motel, because he is very humorously high-strung. I think his character provides a lot of comic relief at least did for me, in the show, because he's very high-strung. He's trying to do the right thing, but he's so nervous and sort of wired that is that a part of your character naturally, do you think?
I think so. I would tend to say I try to be the comic relief in my life. I'm always cracking jokes, but I'm definitely a type A person, very organized, very high-strung, very nervous, probably not as nervous as Motel is generally. I think some of that has tempered with age, but yeah, I think I identify with Motel in a lot of ways.
Now, one thing that you mentioned the Sabbath prayer scene, which I thought was probably the most beautiful scene in the entire show, because it expresses to people who are not Jewish. The play in general shows us that Jewish people are loving people. They are tight-knit people. They're very close. They are concerned about each other to a fault, maybe up in each other's business when you get into Yenti and all that. But they're a very loving group. They care very much about each other. They're very devoted to their faith. And the Sabbath prayer scene, where they all got together and lit candles and prayed. Goldie and Tetva didn't have much money, barely had enough food on the table for themselves, but they welcomed anybody that wanted to come and join them for a meal. They welcomed anybody that wanted to come into their house, regardless of how they may be feeling about them at that point. And the Sabbath prayer scene was the most beautiful scene, because when they all joined hands and prayed and lit the candles, it really expressed the unity of the Jewish people in a very moving way, I thought.
I appreciate that, yeah.
And I thought that was very beautifully carried out. But this story is not just about Jewish prejudices. It is about prejudice in terms of class, prejudice in terms of gender, prejudice in terms of age. It expresses all kinds of prejudices, and it's very important to, I think, where to have us explore ourselves and say, where do we draw the line into what is tradition and what is faith-based and what is prejudice. George and I were talking at intermission, and I am disabled and have been wheelchair bound all my life. And had we gone, and George is a black man, and had we gone by American traditions as they have been, I would be in an institution today. And, thank God I have a wonderful wife to take care of me, but I still face that, in every day, because if my wife were not able to care for me, the government, God bless America, does not allow enough options for people like me to be cared for in my home, and I have to worry about in the back of my mind, will the day come when me as a husband and a father to a 9-year-old daughter would have to be institutionalized? And I can't think about that, but that's one of the things that has to come into my mind, because government does not make it as much as possible as it should for me to remain a functional member of society. And in George's situation, if you went by American traditions of even, earlier in the 20th century, he would not be where he is today. So at what point do we mark prejudice and tradition? And no matter who we are, we all have prejudice, right? I mean, we don't want to admit that we do, but we do. I mean, you can see that Tevi is a good man, and he loves his daughters, and he gives in to letting the first two of them marry for love, despite the fact that Model is poor, despite the fact that Perchik is a modern thinker. He can relent on that. He will not relent into his third daughter marrying someone outside of the Jewish faith. He can't. That he draws the line at. And it's interesting to see where his lines are drawn. I mean, he's willing to say, even at one point, our daughter is dead to us because he is not of the Jewish faith, but he is more relenting in the other two cases. And he even questions the love in his own marriage when he asked Golda, do you love me? We were in an arranged marriage, but do you really love me? And it's very interesting, and it causes us all to reflect our own issues. But if you want to speak to any of that, please feel free to go ahead. I didn't mean to take over there. But
no, of course, yeah. I think what makes this show so appealing is the fact that even though it is about a bunch of Jews living in Russia or modern day Ukraine, it really does resonate with every single person, no matter your culture, race, ability, disability, position in society, income, whatever it is. The thing that really struck with me is when you're mentioning, of course, that Chava, the third daughter, she marries Fyedka, a Russian boy, and Tevye goes to disown her. And the cultural and historical tradition behind that is, I know that, and I feel like this is still something that pervades in many societies today, unfortunately, where people are looked down upon for marrying for love, for a person who is of another kind of status or situation, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But back then, in order to have been married in the Russian Orthodox Church, Chava would have had to have been baptized. So I think that's the extra layer that necessarily the show doesn't get across, but that's really why Tevye is so willing to exile her, even though there is some arc in the final scene, but I'm not going to ruin that for anyone who may be coming to the show later on.
Right.
But that I really see it because she's abandoned, while the other two daughters with Seidel and Huddle, even though they are inching further and further away from the matchmaker, Tevye is willing to bend because, okay, in the end, they are marrying Jews. They're still a part of the community. But Chava basically gave up her entire identity in his eyes.
And he was such a faithful man to the Jewish religion. I mean, he was very angry with God, like, really, you're doing all this to me? But he's still talking to him and thanking him for this or that. And
God's his best friend.
Yeah. His talking to God is prevalent throughout the entire show. And very very moving. And again, the second act, the Jewish people, what you said, food, family, and education. But definitely, the Jewish are very humorous people. They have a great sense of humor. They a sort of a kind of humor which I appreciated. Sarcastic humor when you're looking at Golda and things like that, the way that they present themselves, and that provides a comic relief throughout a very serious, very emotionally involved story. Because you're looking at the second act, and in the last scene of the first act, through the whole rest of the play, you have to have that comic relief that they have to make the rest of the show emotionally palpable. And they have, otherwise it would just be, very depressing to come out of there. Fiddler on the Roof has a way of ending it as they're making their exodus, and doesn't go into, because you kind of want to know, well, do they meet up? Do they see each other again? What happens to them? But then you don't want to know what happens to them because you know that one of them's going to Siberia to be with their husband, and does she make it? And do they make it? Do any of them ever see each other again? Because they're all so close. But it stops it as they make their exodus. And at one point you want to know what happens, but on the second hand, you're going, oh, thank goodness it doesn't go in, because you don't get into the really heartbreaking potential of what could have become of those very close and loving people. And I just thought it was beautifully executed in that regard. And the ensemble cast was terrific in their choral singing. How did a young guy like you from New Jersey find your way to Little Wytheville, Virginia?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I went on a murder mystery dinner theater contract in Pittsburgh with a company called Musical Mysteries and More. And on that contract, I met Lauren Alice Smith, who plays Huddle in our production of Fiddler on the Roof. And she said she works at the Wohlfahrt House, lives in Wytheville, Virginia, and a few of us submitted, and I happened to be cast in last year's production of Grease, and then I've been coming back ever since.
So you've been coming, not in quite every play, but you've been coming back regularly. How are you chosen? Do they just choose you based upon need, or if you show interest, do they bring you in? How does that work?
I suppose what I did was I sent George my audition reel and my headshot and my resume. I've cultivated a really great relationship with the Wohlfahrt House since.
Yes, and I was going to ask you, how do you find with the Virginia and the people, Wohlfahrt House?
Yeah. Oh, I love being here. I mean, I live right now in Jersey City. I live about 3 blocks from the Hudson River. I can see the World Trade Center from my bedroom, which is a really, really cool experience. Mm-hmm. But Wytheville is the polar opposite of where I live. I mean, I know it's only several thousand people. There aren't any major cities like within 35 to 45 minutes. So every time I come here, I feel like I finally have a chance to breathe. Not that I don't love living in Jersey City, because I absolutely do, and I would rather live nowhere else in the world. But it gives me usually a month and a half to 2 months whenever I'm here to just breathe, connect with nature, really just enjoy not always being on public transportation and getting to be with the fresh air and not seeing pavement everywhere. It's really, really, really lovely getting to know Wytheville.
Well, you certainly do a great job in the show, and you add a lot of color and life to the role and to the production. And it's very nice of you to talk to this old country boy here on his podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually don't know what is next for me as an actor. I work a survival job. That's what we say in the business, in order to maintain money when we're not on an acting contract. I help kids with their college applications, their college processes. I kind of manage a lot of my students' kind of like high school processes, helping them with course selection and finding teacher recommendations and figuring out what clubs to join and opportunities to pursue. So that's kind of what's on the horizon for me. I've had quite a few auditions and callbacks. Something that's really exciting. I have a callback for a national tour coming up, so that we could see if that comes through. Something that I wanted to say about the show, kind of to piggyback on you talking about the exodus of all of the characters a little earlier, there have actually been quite a bit of material put out into the world that surmises what has happened to these characters after Fiddler on the Roof. I've started reading this novel called After Anatevka, and it was written by Alexandra Silber, who played Huddle on the West End and then just Seidel in the most recent Broadway revival. And it kind of chronicles what happened to Huddle and Perchik after they go off to Siberia. And they're definitely adult themes, so I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. But if you're curious to know what happens to them, I definitely recommend that. I've made it about a quarter of the way through so far. And I've actually put a lot of thought on my own, because I know Model and Seidel end up in Warsaw, Chava and Fietka end up in Krakow, Kevia Golda and their 2 youngest daughters end up in America. I put in a lot of thought into what happens to them in the years past. And I mean, I don't think it's necessarily very, very positive. Or I guess in the years future, I don't necessarily think it's incredibly positive what happens to them. And as much as I don't want it to happen, I'm nervous that a lot of these characters might end up existing and suffering through the Holocaust, unfortunately. But that's just my own 2K. I'm not an optimist, clearly, in that regard.
Right.
But those are just my 2 takes on that, my 2 cents.
Very interesting, and thank you for sharing that. And that's I'm glad you brought that up, because it's one point that I wanted to make that I've neglected to thus far. As I said, my thoughts in knowing what little I know about the Jewish culture, when you think that a play is going to be Jewish oriented, you think of, or I do, of the Holocaust and that era, but then you realize that stories like this, the stories that inspired Fiddler on the Roof were first published in 1894, I think, which helps you to realize that the Jewish people were being senselessly persecuted for centuries. This is not something that was born with Hitler. This has been going on more or less since the beginning of time, I suppose.
Yeah, since the beginning of Judaism, essentially.
And I never will forget a scene in it has a way. It's a story that has a way of reaching everybody, which and George and the entire cast just executed everything beautifully. I want to mention Lauren Smith has a beautiful operatic voice, and her performing "Far from the Home I Love" was very moving as well.
Moves us every day.
And Nick doing "If I Were a Rich Man" just kind of brought down the house. Just,
of course, he is a master class in like everything.
he just had that power, and like I said, he knocked our socks off as Jerry Lee Lewis in the way he played that piano and just took on all the eccentricities of that character. It was just, everybody did such a great job, and it's a real pleasure to talk with you this morning.
Of course, likewise, Zach.
I hope that you've enjoyed it half as much as I have.
No, I guess come see Fiddler on the Roof. We're at the Wohlfahrt House until October 22nd.
Yes, please come and see this wonderful production. Great food as well. Great meal
really good.
Accompanying the show as well. And thank you again for talking with me, Mikey. It's been a real pleasure. And best of luck to you in the future. I hope we'll see you at Wohlfahrt House again for future productions, and maybe we'll talk again on the podcast sometime. I hope so.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zach. I hope so as well.
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate you.
Of course. Likewise.
Thanks a lot.